Hi, this is Mark, and this is Mark's Photo Laboratorium, where we do bad things to good cameras. Sometimes we do good things to bad cameras, but, well, I'll just let you see what I did here, and maybe somebody can take this and run with it. What I have here is my Mamiya pan. What I did is I modified, this is just your typical 1970s vintage Mamiya 645. This is a 500 body. They also made a 1000 with 1,000th of a second shutter speed, and I think they also made a J model, which is essentially the same shape and function of this. These are great little cameras. They're electronic, but not heavily electronic. And I don't think they'll have near the problems going forward that the more integrated circuit type cameras have of even this Mamiya 645s. This is basically gears and a few circuits inside, not too terribly complicated. Some great lenses available for it. If you turn it into a panoramic camera, you can get a 35mm lens, which is one of the pricier lenses in the collection, but if you consider the Hasselblad X-Pan, if you want to buy that 30mm lens, you need a special finder for that, and that lens may set you back as much as the body of the camera, and that's just crazy. The prices they're paying for what's essentially an all electronic camera, where you're at the mercy of 20-30-year-old, probably closer to 30-year-old circuitry and motors and things like that, you're taking some risks with your money. Another great lens is the 80mm 1.9, and you can go out and shoot panoramas with that and get all the bokeh you want with it. But the 80mm 2.8 is a great lens and nicely priced. There's also a 45mm wide angle, a 55mm wide angle, and then there's some of your short and longer telephotos if you're doing more of portraits. Don't know why you do portraits on a panoramic camera, but I guess you could. And what's nice about it is it's an SLR, so if you want to do macro panoramics, you can. There's no parallax error. If you see it, you can focus it. There's even a 80mm macro lens for these things. So I'm going to go through some of the steps and challenges involved in converting one of these to what I guess I'd call a panoramic camera. What I tried to do is maintain the same format ratio as what the X-Pan has, and you can come pretty darn close to that on a 120mm film, a 120 sized film, by going to about a 22mm high frame with about a 60mm width. Puts you right in that X-Pan ratio. And you're essentially making it a half frame camera, which when I show you what's needed to do that is probably the key to doing that. And you can't, as far as I know, you probably can't do it with the more modern cameras, more modern 645s. I haven't had any of those apart, so I don't know. The first challenge we have is the masking of the frame. So I'll show you what I did here. You can pick these bodies up for around $100 to $200. Most of them need light seals, and that's a little bit of a challenge, but there's instructions on the internet. You can buy the foam on Amazon, cut it out with an X-Acto knife or one of those slicer Fiskars type knives, and you can do it. Q-tips and wet the foam, and you can get it done. Here's what I did in here, and really the masking seems to be the biggest challenge in this conversion, at least for me, because you have to mask off the upper and the lower part of the frames that you don't want bleeding into the next frame, since you're turning it into a half frame camera. So what I've got back here is a 3D printed frame that sits right behind the shutter, and it is glued with super glue to the outer frame. And I think I had to do that with the shutter open on B and do it from the front, because you don't want to super glue your shutter curtains stuck. The bottom, the challenge here is your rollers, to get those masked off. This frame here is actually shorter than these rollers. And because of the way the mirror works inside, I'll flip it around. Essentially what I did was I took this tape. It's not cap-on tape, it's a black 3M tape. I can put that in the comments somewhere. Bought it off Amazon, but it is opaque, and some people use it to repair bellows. And it's really thin and it's really sticky. So what I had to do here, and it's a bit of a bodge, I basically taped off the upper roller. It gets the job done. This is a very slippery tape, but you still run the risk of having any kind of dust or grit in there scratching the emulsion surface of your film. So I've got a 3D printed frame back here, and that's that part. What I thought would be easy is doing it from the front, but that doesn't work. I don't know if you can even see in here, but what I did on the bottom, I glued a piece of 3D printed material to the bottom of the frame to block off the light from the front, so it would block off the light that might go through the rollers, the bottom set of the rollers. The challenge is, I thought I could put a frame in front, which would maybe be ideal, but the pivot of the mirror, what I 3D printed interferes with the pivot of the mirror, so that the mirror would not return back down. It wouldn't jam the camera, but you didn't get the mirror to return. Ideally, I think somebody would need to come up with probably a brass plate with the cutout, a really thin brass that could be affixed, probably with super glue again. There we go. To mask off the frame, and that I think would get it done, and you wouldn't have to have the tape on the rollers on the inside. I don't know if you can even see what's going on, what I did in there, but down there is that piece of 3D printed plastic that just, once again, was super glued in there. So masking is the challenge, at least it is for me. So I guess what I'm doing here is we're gonna throw it out kind of open source, and maybe somebody that has a fiber laser and is better at fabricating or has more time than I do could perfect that mask, either from the front or the back, but you got to come up with a half frame mask on this. And the film advance I will show you in the next part. And what's great about this Mamiya system is you can have a waist level finder like all the young people like. I tell you, once you get a certain age and your glasses and your eyes and you got bifocals or whatever you have, you'll learn to hate a waist level finder, because the magnifier, you need your glasses on, but you can't see the screen without your glasses off, and they're really not much fun. But there you can see my professional masking job to denote the frame that you're actually shooting. Now, if you're using an AE or a meter finder, I don't know what they read. I don't know if they're center weighted. I guess I could do my research. So ideally, maybe you would need to mark the screen with an X-Acto or something. I don't know if you could mask it off and still get the benefit of the metering prism or the AE prism, which that's really kind of nice. And what's neat about these little Mamiyas is you got shutter speeds that electronic up to 8 seconds. I mean, how much more perfect could you get for shooting gas stations at night on 800T film? So they're really nice. Here we go with a contact sheet, or a negative sheet, I guess I could say, of my test roll with this camera. One thing about the modification I've done is the spacing isn't perfect. It's good enough for me, I guess, but because of the way the modification was done, it can be a little spastic. The pictures show good quality, good sharpness. Things are in focus. The negatives look good, like you would want them to be. This actually is, I believe, Lucky 400 film, which is a pretty contrasty, punchy film. And it also has a soft emulsion, I've noticed. So there is some scratching going on. It wasn't terrible, but I don't know if it was from the film or if it was from the camera. It could be both. Nothing is terribly noticeable, and if you end up with your photos digital, you can take the healing brush in Photoshop and Lightroom and get that scratch out of there. It might be a bigger problem if you're doing pure darkroom work, the full scale analog. You'll notice that the inner frame spacing isn't the most consistent. I don't know what a real pro lab, if you ended up sending them half frame 120 film, what they do when they run it through a Fujitsu or a Noritsu or a Frontier. But as it got to the end of the roll, it also got very spastic with the framing. And in fact, there's probably a couple more blank segments that I just cut out that aren't shown here. So the first 12 or 15 exposures worked great, but if you're shooting half frame, you should get around 30 pictures on your roll of film. But as it got towards the end, it got worse on the spacing problem, so I didn't. But if you look at what the cost of an X-Pan is and what the cost of this is, you can buy a lot of film and have a lot of bad spacing going on. I think the key to it, once I show the modification internally, is you have to wind it fairly slow. I think the faster you wind it, the more risk you have of it skipping a frame, or sometimes it would even skip more than one of the half frames. The counter does go up by halves, so you can still judge how many shots you've taken or how many you have left. And this is just a 120 insert. You don't need a 220 insert. You probably could use one, but I don't know what the benefit would be, other than I think you get an extra bonus frame on a 120 roll using the standard spacing. So I don't think there would be anything other than the price of a 220 insert is cheaper. So I'm pretty happy with the way the negatives turned out, with the way the images look. What I can probably do here is convert a couple of these over and show them on screen for you. Then you can be the judge.